Well, I have a bunch of books to tell you about. This is one book, Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed, which most of you know from her book Wild. This is the 10th anniversary of this book, and Cheryl had a column called Dear Sugar. This book has those letters to her and some answers, but here's what I really want to tell you. There is not a way that you can read this book and not be deliriously reinvigorated by the goodness of people. Starting with Cheryl, the people who write to her, her ability, her sense of humanity is extraordinary. If you get one book this year, if there's one book you're going to give everybody, I'll probably say that about a lot of books, but it's definitely about this book. Then, if you just want to make yourself happy and laugh, Billy Collins came out. Billy Collins, who I love, he could read me the phone book, but his poems just always make me happy. Well, these are tiny little poems. They are just hilarious, and I'll read you, I could read you the whole book in a minute. Well, here's one, New York Directions. It's down in the village between bleak and bleakest. Here, I'll read you this one. It's called Quatrain. When a woman in a low-cut blouse walked by, the grocer in the doorway raised his eyebrows, revealing the 4 lines in his forehead. So yeah, this is, my husband read it before I did when it came to the house. Billy Collins just understands sort of the absurdity of human nature. And he manages to put this into tiny little poems. Here's another one, Carpe Diem. As the coffee was brewing, I learned from a book that the trunks of elephants are sensitive enough to pick up a coin and powerful enough to smash a tiger to the ground. And that was more than enough seizing the day for me. There's a new book out called Paul Newman, The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man, and it's a memoir. And Paul Newman, between the years of 1987 and 1992, started writing his memoir by being interviewed by one of his dearest friends. And he had his friend also interview his first wife, Joanne Woodward, his kids, John Huston, actors that he had worked with, directors. And he did this project for 5 years and then presumably burned the tapes. And just recently they came across these transcripts, like 8, 10, 12, 14,000 pages of transcripts. And David Rosenthal, his editor, and his daughters worked to produce this posthumously, obviously, memoir. And I had the pleasure of interviewing Clay and Newman and David Rosenthal. I think you'll love the conversation. It was really, really fascinating. Once you read this book, you'll have a whole different view of Paul Newman. You'll want to go back and watch all his movies. And yes, he was mighty, mighty handsome. So, Signal Fires by Danny Shapiro is perfect fiction. You care about the characters. You want to read it overnight. It'll make you think about how you live your life. It'll make you think about whether you would do the same thing. You want to talk to your friends about it, which means it's a great book club book. But it's perfect fiction. You could distract yourself and make yourself happy. Right now it's called Signal Fires. I thought about this the other day because they've aired the story of Marilyn Monroe that's based on Joyce Carol Oates' book that she had written called Blondie. The filmer did not get great reviews, but it did remind me that years ago I read this biography, Marilyn Monroe by Barbara Leeming, and Barbara Leeming gives us a riveting full portrait of Marilyn Monroe, who was neither the dumb blonde nor the pathetic victim. She was more complicated, more sad in some ways, but also very knowing and wise and smart, and you just get a fuller understanding of what her whole life was about. I could not more highly recommend this biography. I wouldn't have thought I cared about Marilyn Monroe one way or another, but Barbara Leeming is a friend And so I wanted to read the book, and I'm thrilled I read the book, and it made me care about Marilyn Monroe a lot. Every once in a while, a book comes along that I feel is important for us to understand other lives, to be walking in somebody else's shoes. And without going into too much detail, this book, The Other Side of Prospect, A Story of Violence, Injustice in the American City, uses the particular neighborhood of New Hallville for us to think about how our cities or some of our neighborhoods have gone from thriving communities with lovely homes and people employed and doing well to places of violence and sadness, and most of all, places of hopelessness. And Nikki Dawidoff does a brilliant job by telling us the story of some of its citizens for us to think differently about all of it. Okay, I'm obsessed with this book. It's called Women Holding Things by Maura Kalman, and she's an artist, and I love her art, but I particularly love the message here. And I'm going to read you the beginning. Sometimes when I am feeling particularly happy or content, I think I can provide sustenance for legions of human beings. I can hold the entire world in my arms. Other times I can barely cross the room and I drop my arms frozen. Then I am brought back to my grandmother, my mother, my aunts, my sister, my daughter, my granddaughters, my cousins, the women who were my friends. We have spoken to each other for thousands of hours about all that can be held and not held, and how sometimes the water runs through our fingers, and how sometimes the cakes are baked, and the beds are made, and the books are written, the bed and the books and the case. And in my case, it is good to hold all. Holding a specific thing is a very nice thing to do. You are standing there and you hold an enormous cabbage, or a violin, or a bright balloon. That is a job in and of itself, the simple act of doing one thing. And perhaps someone you are walking with will ask you to hold something for a minute while they tie their shoelaces. Of course is the answer, as long as you like.